so I've got to do MLK for Black History Month, right? So let's just dive right in. Also, as you can tell, this is a whispered video. It's going to be more of a fast whisper. Some people complain that I whisper too fast, but these books are really long. So I go a little faster than usual. But I do have lots of slow whispered content on my memberships. You can click join. It's only 99 cents. And I have tons of whispered content coming out there every single week that are way, way slower than this. So check that out if you so wish. But let's get started. Who was Martin Luther King Jr.? Growing up in the South, hold on, let me slide this over here. Growing up in the South was not easy for Martin Luther King Jr. He was born in 1929 when black people were treated very differently than white people. One day, Martin's father took his young son to buy a pair of shoes. The store was empty, but the white shopkeeper told them that they would have to wait in the back of the store. Martin's father got very angry. Why did they have to sit in the back of the store? If he couldn't buy shoes for his son in the front of the store, he would not buy them at all. He took Martin by the hand and led him out of the store. As they walked down the street, his father said, "I don't care how long I have to live with this system. I will never accept it." The system in the South kept black people apart from white people. It was called segregation. Black children and white children went to separate schools. Black people had to ride at the back of the bus. As he grew up, Martin decided to fight for change, but it was a peaceful fight. Martin led marches. He banded people together in protests. He made speeches. Many people listened to his words and joined his nonviolent fight. Martin Luther King Jr. fought using his words, not his fists. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream that all people could live together in peace and be treated equally. And though he died over 40 years ago, his dream lives on. Chapter 1, A Perfect Boy. On January 15th, 1929, a baby boy was born in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. The doctor said he was perfect. His parents were so happy. They named him Michael, the same name that his father had. But when little Michael was 5, his father decided to change both of their names to Martin. So now the little boy became Martin Luther King Jr. Young Martin had a very happy home life. He had an older sister named Willie Christine. Everyone called her Chris. He also had a younger brother named Alfred Daniel. The Kings lived in a large house on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta. Their neighborhood was comfortable. No one was very poor or very rich. There was a lot of love in Martin's family. Martin never remembered his parents arguing. Martin's mother, Alberta Williams King, was very soft-spoken and easygoing. Her father was a well-known minister. After high school, she went to college, which was something that not many black women did back then. Alberta had a warm personality, and Martin always found it very easy to talk to her. Martin's father, Martin Sr., was a large man in many ways. He weighed about 220 pounds and was filled with self-confidence. Martin Jr. admired his father very much. His father's family was very poor and lived in a rundown shack. They were sharecroppers. A sharecropper is a farmer who does not own his own land. Instead, he works on another farmer's land and gets some of the crops for himself. Martin's father worked hard to get his high school and college diplomas. After college, he became a minister of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The Ebenezer Baptist Church was like a second home to Martin. And so his parents told Martin not to hate white people. It was his duty as a Christian to love everyone. Sorry, I keep checking to make sure the book's in frame, even though it always is. I keep double checking. Martin's mother told him that he should always keep a sense of somebodyness, that he was important, even though the outside world was telling him he was not. As Martin Luther King Jr. grew up, he became more and more aware of the problems facing black people, especially in the South. Everywhere he looked, there were whites-only signs. Blacks could not go into many hotels, restaurants, and stores. Blacks could not even drink out of the same water fountains as whites. In many cities, blacks had to ride in the back of a bus. If they tried to sit in the front, they were thrown in jail. And if black people wanted to go to a movie theater, they had to sit way up in the balcony. These rules were called Jim Crow laws, and they made Martin very angry. In high school, Martin had to take a long bus ride to and from school. He always walked to the back where the other black children sat. Once, Martin and a teacher traveled by bus to Dublin, Georgia for a speech contest. Martin won the contest and was very proud. On the way home to Atlanta, the bus driver ordered Martin and his teacher to give up their seats to white passengers. When they did not move right away, the bus driver became angry. It was the law, after all. They ended up standing in the aisle for the 19-mile ride. But Martin told himself, one of these days I'm going to put my body up there where my mind is. He knew that one day he'd have a seat up front. Chapter 2, School Days. Martin Luther King Jr. was always a very good student. He loved to read and make speeches. He studied very hard and skipped 2 grades. At just 15 years old, he graduated from high school. That summer, Martin worked in Simsbury, Connecticut. It was Martin's first time in the North. He had a job in the tobacco fields. He was surprised to see how different life was for blacks in the North. Black and white children went to the same schools. There were no separate restaurants. Martin dreamed that this could happen in the South too, if only there was some way he could make this dream come true. Martin returned to Atlanta to attend Morehouse College. This was the same college that his father had attended. All the students at the school were black. All the teachers were black too. At first, Martin wasn't sure what he wanted to study. He knew that he wanted to spend his life helping black people. But what was the best way to do that? Perhaps he would follow in his father's footsteps and become a minister, or maybe he would become a lawyer. In college, Martin Luther King Jr. read an essay by a man named Henry David Thoreau. The essay was written in 1849. In this essay, Thoreau said that people have the right to disobey unjust laws. In Thoreau's time, the United States still allowed slavery. Thoreau wanted to protest slavery. He felt the government was wrong to allow it, so he refused to pay his taxes. As a result, he was thrown in jail. But Thoreau did not mind being in jail. He was making a point. Martin liked the way Thoreau thought. He also liked that Thoreau protested in a peaceful way. 2 of Martin's favorite college teachers were ministers. Because of them, he decided to become a minister as well. As a minister, Martin could speak out against segregation. He could show his people how much he cared. When Martin Luther King Jr. was only 17, he gave a sermon at his father's church. He wasn't a minister yet, but the sermon was heartfelt and inspiring. His words not only touched the members of the congregation, but his father as well. The very next year, Martin became a minister and also an assistant in his father's church. In 1948, Martin graduated from college. He was 19. My gosh. Martin's father Crozer Theological Seminary, a school of religion in Chester, Pennsylvania. Out of 100 students at the school, only 6 were black. At Crozer, Martin studied the teachings of people such as Mahatma Gandhi, the first leader of modern-day India. Like Thoreau, Mahatma Gandhi believed change could come from peaceful protests. In 1951, Martin graduated from Crozer. He was the top student in his class, but he still thought there was more to learn about helping people through protest. So he moved to Massachusetts to study at the Boston University School of Theology. In Boston, Martin met Coretta Scott. Coretta had grown up in Alabama, but she was in Boston studying to be a singer. On their first date, Martin drove his green Chevrolet to pick her up. Over lunch, they talked about how hard it was to be black in the United States. They also talked about how people could live together in peace. Martin was impressed by Coretta. After only an hour, Martin knew that they were going to get married one day, and he was right. On June 18th, 1953, they were married at the Scott's home in Marion, Alabama. The young couple lived in Boston. Martin had to finish his studies at Boston University, and Coretta had to complete her work to become a music teacher. When he was done with school, he became Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin was now ready to start his life's work, but exactly how would he do that? Chapter 3, Martin Gets a Job. 2 churches, one in Massachusetts and one in New York, wanted Martin to become their minister. While Martin was deciding which job to take, another letter came from the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. The church, which had no minister, invited Martin to come down and preach. On a clear winter day in January 1954, Martin set out to visit the church in Alabama. On the drive, he listened to one of his favorite operas on the radio. The music and the beautiful countryside made the 4-hour drive pass quickly. During the drive, Martin practiced the sermon he was going to deliver the next day in Montgomery. By the time he got there, he was nervous. He was not afraid to speak in front of people. At his father's church, Martin stood up before crowds and preached. But Martin knew that if his sermon tomorrow was good, the job of minister would be his. Martin wasn't sure he wanted to live in the South. He knew that life in the North was easier for blacks and fairer. Still, the church in Montgomery sounded like a wonderful place, and he wanted to make a good impression. Should he show the people that he was smart? Should he tell them all about his education? No. Martin knew that all he had to do was the same thing he had done before in churches: speak from the heart and help people pray. Sure enough, Martin's sermon was so good that the people at the Dexter Avenue Church asked him to become their pastor. Martin talked with Coretta. She too shared Martin's fears. Could she find a good job in the South? In the North, there were more opportunities for black women. Martin and Coretta also talked about what it would be like raising children in the South. In the end, Martin and Coretta decided to live in Alabama. After all, the South was their home, and more importantly, at the Dexter Avenue Church, Martin could help fix some of the problems of local black people. Chapter 4, Riding the Bus. Martin started his job as the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church on September 1st, 1954. In his sermons, he persuaded church members to register to vote. Voting was one way to change unjust laws. He also encouraged them to join the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP is one of the oldest civil rights groups in the United States. It was formed on February 12, 1900. Since Monday was the start of a new school and work week, people would have to take cabs or find rides in cars. Some would even have to walk, but Martin believed the boycott would send a strong message. If black people couldn't sit wherever they wanted, they would refuse to take the buses. On Monday morning, Coretta and Martin woke up early. They peeked out the window to look outside at the bus stop. A bus pulled up. It was empty. Martin jumped into his car and drove around the city. Almost all the black people he saw were riding in cars or walking. Later, he learned some had to walk more than 10 miles to get to where they were going. Holy moly. The first day of the boycott was a tremendous success, but it needed to continue. People would have to give up riding the buses the next day, and the next day after that. They had to continue the boycott until the law changed. White leaders in the Montgomery city government were angry. The city buses were losing money, but still the leaders did not want to change the laws. Instead, they tried making things harder for black people. The police commissioner told the taxi companies to charge higher fares so that it would be too expensive for most people to take taxis. They would have no choice but to walk. But Martin and the other black leaders had a plan. They helped organize carpools. Many people, both black and white, volunteered to drive people taking part in the boycott. It was a good example of peaceful protest. Peaceful protest, however, also could be dangerous. I need to adjust my seat and my chair might squeak. Okay, there we go. Martin was arrested by the local police. Hold on, that was quite a jump. Oh, it also could be dangerous. Martin was arrested by the local police. They said he was speeding in his car. Martin knew that he was not. The police wanted to scare him into stopping the bus boycott. Then a firebomb was thrown onto the porch of his house. Martin was frightened for his family, but that did not stop him. The boycott lasted over a year. Finally, the Supreme Court of the United States said that laws separating whites and blacks on the Montgomery buses had to end. Martin was overjoyed. Now it was time for people to ride the buses again, sitting wherever they wanted. Early in the morning on December 21st, 1956, 3 other leaders of the boycott came to Martin's house. Reporters followed the men as they walked to the nearest bus stop. The reporters shouted out questions. Cameras flashed in Martin's face. This was a momentous day. When the bus arrived, Martin and the other leaders got on. The reporters followed. Martin took a seat right up front. On his face was a great big smile. Chapter 5, A Peaceful Fight. Integrating the buses in Montgomery had worked, but Martin Luther King Jr. knew that this was just the beginning. Martin and other black leaders met in Atlanta, Georgia. They formed a civil rights group called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. On February 14th, 1957, Martin became the head of the group. In the South, civil rights leaders faced growing violence. One man's home was bombed, so were several churches. Then a service station and a cab stand were bombed. Martin urged everyone to remain calm. We must not return violence under any condition, he said. He knew that his advice was hard to follow. Martin's speeches made him famous in Montgomery. Wherever he went, thousands of people showed up to hear him. People even ran up to him on the street to ask for his autograph. On May 17th, 1957, Martin spoke at a gathering called the Prayer Pilgrimage in Washington, D.C. The march took place on the 3rd anniversary of the passage of Brown v. Board of Education. On the day of the march, thousands of black and white people gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The speakers asked the government to pass a civil rights bill. This bill would guarantee all people in the United States equal Martin said that was the most urgent request to President Dwight Eisenhower. While Martin was marching and speaking, Coretta was busy running the King household. On October 23rd, their second child, Martin Luther King III, was born. Martin said of Coretta, "I am indebted to my wife Coretta, without whose love, sacrifices, and loyalty neither life nor work would bring fulfillment." Wow, that's romantic. By this time, Coretta wanted to become much more involved in the movement. Martin, however, preferred that she stay at home raising their children. In 1959, Martin did agree to take Coretta along on a trip to India. Martin wanted to see the land where his hero Gandhi had lived. As he traveled through the country, he saw that India was divided between the very poor and the very rich. Many people did not have jobs. Many slept out on the streets. Rich people, on the other hand, had beautiful homes and fancy clothes. Yet even with so much poverty, there was peace among the people. Yes, they were poor, but they did not take their troubles out on anyone. Martin visited some of the places that were special to Gandhi. He and his group went to a place called Bombay. It was there that Gandhi had started a walk of more than 200 miles to protest a tax on salt. Gandhi's walk began with 8 people. The number grew to thousands. Some say that more than 1 million people ultimately joined the walk. Gandhi told his people, "If you are hit, don't hit back. Even if they shoot at you, don't shoot back. Just keep moving." Martin had a wonderful experience in India. When he returned home, he was even more convinced of the power of peaceful protest. In 1959, the King family moved from Montgomery to Atlanta. It was hard to leave Montgomery, but Martin wanted more time for civil rights work. He could not be a full-time minister. He told his congregation, "History has thrust something on me which I cannot turn away." In Atlanta, Martin Luther King Jr. would become the co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, his father's church. By the year 1960, the civil rights movement was spreading throughout the South. Black students and white students staged sit-ins at lunch counters. Students would sit together at a whites-only lunch counter and wait to be served. Often the police would drag them out, but the students never fought back when arrested. Sometimes people yelled and spit at the students. Some threw rocks at them. No matter how many students were put in jail, the next day others would go sit in at the same lunch counters. They kept on because the fight was something they believed in. Martin took part in the sit-ins. On October 19th, 1960, he was arrested at a lunch counter in a department store in Atlanta. Over 200 students were arrested that same day. They were all taken to the Fulton County Jail. Martin told the judge that the sit-ins pointed out racial injustice. He wanted to make people in Atlanta see how wrong it was to have whites-only eating places. He said, "I must honestly say that we firmly believe that segregation is evil." 5 days passed, and Martin and the students were still in jail. Black people in Atlanta were very worried. Finally, the store owners dropped the charges and everyone was set free. But many white people were still angry with Martin. They wanted him back in jail. On May 4th, 1960, the police stopped Martin in his car judge who had sent Martin to jail. They wanted to know why Martin couldn't post bail. Now, the judge agreed to set bail. Martin was freed. I don't need to describe what bail is, do I? Anyway, Kennedy campaign workers printed millions of leaflets that said Nixon's no comment remark showed that he was a man without a heart. Martin's father, Martin Luther King Sr., decided to vote for Kennedy now. John F. Kennedy won the election that November. He was the first Roman Catholic president. Catholics in the United States had faced prejudice too. That was one of the reasons many black people voted for JFK. Perhaps his own experience as a Catholic would make him more understanding of the problems of race in America. Chapter 6, Freedom Riders. By 1961, there were not as many whites-only lunch counters left in the South, but far too many waiting rooms, bathrooms, and restaurants in bus and train stations still had separate areas for blacks and whites. It didn't matter that the court said that this was illegal. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to President Kennedy, but the president did not take quick action to fix the situation. On May 4th, 1961, a group of students boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C. They were traveling to the South. At some of the rest stops, the black students sat in the whites-only waiting rooms. Again, they were staging peaceful protests. In Anniston, Alabama, the tires of one of the buses were shot out. A bomb was thrown in the window of the other bus. As the frightened riders ran out of the bus, they were attacked. The trip was over. But the students did not give up. More groups rode buses from the north to the south. Again, students were attacked. Many were put in jail. These brave young people became known as the Freedom Riders. One night, a group of Freedom Riders held a meeting in a church in Montgomery, Alabama, where Martin came to speak. Put this back up for you. A crowd outside threw stones and bottles at the church, but Martin urged everyone inside to stay strong. Together they sang the freedom song, "We Shall Overcome." Finally, the angry crowd left. Was this the end of segregation in these places? No. The bus station in Albany, Georgia, for example, refused to give up a whites-only waiting room. So a man named Dr. W.G. Anderson started a group called the Albany Movement. This group staged sit-ins and boycotts. For months, Martin led marches all over Albany. Once again, Martin was put in jail. Martin wanted to serve his sentence of 45 days. After only a couple of days, however, Martin was freed. He had been kicked off buses and out of stores, and now he was being kicked out of jail. Yet, after all the marches and more time in jail, Martin and the rest of the leaders of the Albany movement were faced with defeat. The segregation laws in Albany remained, at least for the time being. While some people might have given up, Martin looked at the setback as a beginning. His fight would continue. Chapter 7, Freedom Comes to Birmingham. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that the civil rights movement would suffer defeats, but now he was more determined than ever to prove the power of peaceful protest. He looked for the city with the toughest Jim Crow laws. It was Birmingham, Alabama. If Albany, Georgia was bad, Birmingham was worse. That's my neighbor upstairs. I'm so sorry. I don't know what he's doing. Schools were still segregated in Birmingham. The water fountains were marked colored or white. Birmingham's police commissioner was Bull Connor. He was very tough on black people. He made them afraid to speak out against Jim Crow laws. Even the white people who did not like segregation were afraid to say anything. Martin and the leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had a plan. Besides sit-ins at lunch counters, meetings were held at black churches all around Birmingham. At churches, protesters talked to people. They talked about peaceful protest. They sang freedom songs, "We Shall Overcome," As Martin knew, the songs inspired a crowd. They gave black people courage for a good cause. The Birmingham protests began. After 3 days of sit-ins, 35 people had been arrested. Now it was time for the second part of Martin's plan. Martin and the leaders of the SCLC decided to boycott white businesses. Martin knew this would anger store owners. Almost half the people living in Birmingham were black. Without black customers, stores would have a hard time making money. On April 6th, Martin organized a march to the Birmingham City Hall. Many people joined this march. Bull Connor was growing angry. He and the policemen took clubs and beat some of the protesters. Police dogs were let loose, but the people did not run away. Instead, they became stronger. After 10 days, 500 people had been sent to jail. Some were released on bail, but about 300 remained locked up. Up until this time, Martin had not taken part in the marches. If he joined in, then he'd be arrested, and if he was in jail, he wouldn't be able to stay in charge. On April 12th, Martin and the other leaders of the protest met in Martin's hotel room. Martin's father and brother were there too. Martin Luther King Sr. wanted his son to come home. Easter was on Sunday, and he wanted Martin back at church to preach. Some of the other leaders thought Martin should stay and lead a protest. Other leaders did not want him to march because they feared he would be arrested. And still others thought that Martin should try to raise money to bail out protesters from jail. An argument started. Martin left the room to think and pray. When he returned, he was wearing jeans. He wore jeans whenever he went to jail. Martin had made up his mind. He would join the protesters on their next march. Just as expected, Martin was arrested. Usually he was able to call Coretta right away, but this time he was not allowed to make a call. After 2 days, Coretta, who had recently given birth to their 4th child, became frantic. Martin had been put in a jail cell all by himself. No one was allowed to visit, not even his lawyers. That's unconstitutional. The cell was small and very dark. The only light came from a tiny window near the ceiling. Martin was scared. He worried about his wife and family. He worried about other protesters. Even white ministers were against Martin. In a letter to the Birmingham News, 8 white pastors said that protest was wrong. They felt the SCLC should not break laws. They said that Martin and his group were stirring up hatred and violence. In response, Martin wrote a long letter. Since he did not have any paper in jail, he wrote on the edges of newspapers. He even wrote on toilet paper. In this letter, Martin said that people should obey just laws, but they should disobey unjust laws. Even so, he said, they should always behave peacefully, and people should be ready to accept punishment for disobeying the laws. Martin willingly served his time in jail. After 8 days, he was released. Martin could see the light of day again. Now, one of Martin's advisors had a new plan. He wanted to organize a children's march. At first, Martin was against this plan. Wasn't it too dangerous? But Martin's advisors did not think that the police would throw children in jail. Thousands of Birmingham children, from 6-year-olds to teenagers, were trained in peaceful protest. They joined together in marches, and yes, some children were put in jail. Yikes. On May 2nd, a huge demonstration was planned. Thousands of young people wanted to take part. At one black school, the principal locked up the gates to keep the students inside. But they climbed over the gates. This march was too important to miss. They were marching for freedom. Bull Connor and his men came to the march too. They brought clubs to beat the protesters. Police dogs ripped at the marchers' clothes. The police knocked down people with blasts of water from giant fire were fed up. But what upset many the most was not the violence, but all the lost business. They held a meeting and decided to give in on some of the marchers' demands. These were some of the promises. Lunch counters, restrooms, fitting rooms, and drinking fountains would be desegregated. Blacks would be able to get better jobs. The protesters in jail would be released. A committee of black people and white people would be formed to help ease tensions between the races. At last, the Jim Crow laws in Birmingham were gone. Martin had won a great victory. Chapter 8, I Have a Dream. Birmingham proved to black people all around the country what protesting could do. From North Carolina to Tennessee to Oklahoma, black Americans marched and held sit-ins. They held protests in front of government buildings. Gradually, thousands of lunch counters, hotels, schools, and parks became integrated. Then, on June 11th, 1963, President Kennedy asked Congress to pass a civil rights bill. Kennedy said, "I am asking the Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants and theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. This seems to me to be an elementary right." On August 28th, 1963, Martin and other black leaders led a march to Washington, D.C. They wanted to show Congress how many people supported the Civil Rights Bill. More than 250,000 Americans came from all over the United States. Many rode in cars and buses. Others flew in airplanes. Some walked. Some roller skated. Most of the marchers were black, but there were also thousands of white people. They too felt that the laws of segregation were unjust. The people marched toward the Lincoln Memorial, singing along the way. Many leaders spoke that day, but Martin was unforgettable. Martin had written a speech, but he did not read it. Once he faced the crowd, he remembered a speech he'd given a few months before. In that speech, he had used the phrase, "I have a dream," over and over to express his hopes for the future. Martin wanted to use those same words again, so he put down his script and spoke. His dream was that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. He had a dream that one day people would judge his 4 young children for who they were and not by the color of their skin. Martin's speech ended on a powerful note of hope. He believed that when the day came, everyone could join hands and sing the words to an old slave song, "Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last." The march and Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech were carried on television stations. It was the first time millions of Americans heard Martin speak. His words inspired the crowd. His words inspired the nation. His words inspired the entire world. Because of this speech, Martin Luther King Jr. became the voice of the civil rights movement. Someone is yelling outside. Okay. Hopefully everything's okay. Not so much in this story, but just 2 weeks later, on September 15th, 1963, disaster struck. A blast rocked the early morning silence in Birmingham, Alabama. A bomb went off on the 16th Street Baptist Church. 4 black girls lay dead. They were Denise McNair, age 11, Carol Robertson, age 14, Cynthia Wesley, age 14, and Addie Mae Collins, age 14. People all around the country were shocked. Martin was filled with grief and bitterness. He contacted President Kennedy to say that he was going to Birmingham to make sure that there was no violent reaction by blacks to the bombing. President Kennedy sent 25 FBI agents and bomb President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and standing next to President Johnson when he signed the bill was Martin Luther King Jr. There's a really good movie you guys should check out called Selma, which depicts this event. It was devastating, and it depicts many events coming up in this book, including this moment. It's a really great movie. Check it out if you can. Chapter 9, The Peace Prize. Martin showed people all over the world the power of words, not fists. In 1964, Martin was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This award is given almost every year to the person or group who has done something important in the cause of world peace. Martin was very grateful for this award, but he knew it wasn't his alone. It belonged to the thousands of brave people who had taken part in the non-violent fight for equal rights. Martin gave away all the prize money, $54,000, to civil rights groups. Martin Luther King Jr. had won the Nobel Peace Prize, but he knew he had not reached his goal, equality for all people. He thought about the defeat in Albany and the success in Birmingham. Surely there were other cities where Martin could help end segregation. Martin's eyes turned toward Selma, Alabama. Although half of Selma's residents were black, only 1% was registered to vote. The voting office was only open a few days a month, which made it difficult for people to register. In addition, the literacy test was so hard, Martin said that even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court might not know some answers. For weeks, Martin led groups to the courthouse to register to vote, but it was not legal to hold marches in Selma, so the groups were arrested. Thousands of black people were sent to jail just because they wanted the right to vote. On February 1st, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested during one of the marches. While Martin was in jail, a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee invited a man named Malcolm X to Selma to speak. Malcolm X was a young black leader who disagreed with Martin's peaceful protests. Malcolm X did not believe in fighting with words alone. He thought it was okay to use your fists and more. Malcolm X also spoke about black pride, how blacks should respect themselves and be proud of their race. While Martin Luther King Jr. was in jail, he wrote a letter that was published in the New York Times. In the letter, Martin said, "There are more Negroes in jail with me than there are on the voting rolls." Marches spread to many counties in Alabama. One night, a black marcher, Jimmy Lee Jackson, was shot during the voter registration drive. He was 26 years old. Before he died, Jimmy Lee said that a state trooper had gunned him down. The black community in Selma was outraged, but Martin still did not want people to fight back with more violence. He thought Malcolm X was wrong, so Martin organized a march from Selma to Montgomery, the capital of Alabama, to demand voting rights for black people. At the time, the governor of Alabama was George Wallace. He did not want the march to take place. He put a ban on it. Did this stop Martin? No. On March 7th, marchers faced a wall of state troopers. Martin saw that many would be hurt, even killed. Marching was one thing, getting murdered was another, so he turned the group around. Then good news arrived. Very good news. President Johnson said the protesters had the right to march. He promised to send in troops to protect the marchers. Suddenly, people from all over the country wanted to join in. On March 21st, the group set out. Protestants, Catholics, Jews, blacks, and whites, all marching together. To Martin, it was a beautiful sight. People walked through quiet valleys and over steep hills. They walked along the highway, stopping only to rest for a minute or two. Their bodies ached, their feet were sore, but their hearts were light. By the time they reached Montgomery, they were 25,000 strong. At the state capitol building, they handed a petition to Governor George Wallace demanding voting rights for Black Americans. On August 6, 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. President Johnson said, "Every American citizen must have an equal right to vote." Yet the harsh fact is that in many places in this country, men and women are kept from voting simply because they are Negroes. Now, there would be no more literacy tests, and United States government workers would be in charge of registering voters. The Selma Freedom Marchers had won. Yeah, that's what the movie Selma is about. It's, like I said, I can't stress enough how good it is. Chapter 10, Fighting Poverty. Even with the right to vote, even with the right to sit anywhere on a bus or eat in any restaurant, Black people were struggling. Too many did not have jobs, and those with jobs weren't making enough to live decently. They lived in homes with no heat and leaky pipes. Many people were sick and did not have money to see a doctor. Black people were angry. They were frustrated. Some were tired of listening to Martin. Change wasn't coming fast enough. People who had followed Malcolm X, who was killed in 1965, were forming groups to carry on his message of fighting back with violence. Groups such as the Black Panther Party emerged. These groups talked about Black pride. In August 1965, a riot broke out in a Los Angeles neighborhood called Watts. Angry mobs of Black people ran through the streets. They threw rocks and bottles. They shattered store windows. They stole. They set fires. Many people were killed and injured. The rioting went on for 6 days. Finally, the U.S. Army was called in to stop the violence. Martin understood people's frustration, but he said, when people are voiceless, they will have temper tantrums like a little child who has not been paid attention to. And riots are massive temper tantrums from a neglected and voiceless people. In response, one of the angry rioters said to Martin, "We know that a riot is not the answer, but we've been down here suffering for a long time and nobody cared. Now at least they know we're here. A riot may not be the way, but it is a way." The root of the problem was poverty. People were sick of being poor, so Martin turned his attention to employment, getting better jobs. On July 26, 1965, he led a march to Chicago City Hall. Chicago was the second largest city in the United States. More than 1 million blacks lived there. Some people called Chicago the Birmingham of the North. Most blacks living in Chicago were poor. They had low-paying jobs or no jobs. James Earl Ray in prison. After speaking with Ray, Dexter was convinced that this man had not shot his father. Martin's oldest child, Yolanda, was an actress, author, and peace advocate. Yogi appeared in several films, including a miniseries about her